Ask any planar scholar to name the rulers of the Abyss, and they will rattle off demon princes like a nursery rhyme. Demogorgon, Orcus, Grast, each Tanar'ri lords of demonic chaos. But are they the designers of this plane? Are they even the true rulers? Or are they simply the occupiers, colonists, the squatters? Loud, petulant children playing lords and princes in an alien realm of chaos, born from another reality and built by an ancient evil far older. There is a reason the Tanar'ri demons do not speak of the pale night. There is a reason even the mighty lords of the Abyss avoid her garden and give her citadel of bone a wide berth. They know the power she wields, that she is always watching silently, and they know the difference between a monster and a mother. Aethon knew, and he paid for that knowledge with far more than just his life. There is a saying among the scribes of Candlekeep that all knowledge has a price, and that price is always, eventually paid in full. They do not mean gold, years of study, or the eternal solitude that comes from giving one's life over to dusty archives, brittle pages, and the deciphered texts of forgotten tongues. They mean that certain truths demand payment in the only currency that truly matters, the self. I did not understand this when I was young. I understand it now. Lucan dipped his quill into the inkpot, steadying a trembling hand before continuing his entry. 5 Marpanoth, 1491 Dale Reckoning, year of the Scarlet Witch. We travel to the Abyss tomorrow. It will be the first time for me, but not for my master or, sadly, those that preceded me. I was 16 when I arrived to Candlekeep. I only learned much later the grim fates of those who served as apprentice for Master Aethon before me, each lasting little more than a year after returning themselves from the abyssal plane. Merrick hanged himself. Callista found her piece by blade and crimson bath. And Torvin? He simply walked into the trackless sea, pockets and pack burdened with heavy stone. I have heard the whispers of the other academic sages and scholars of this great library, that I would be next, that Aethon's obsession has become a heretical contagion that would claim me as it had claimed the others. Yet he has assured my well-being and safe passage. Still, he grows increasingly distant and impatient, evidenced by the grooves his scarred fingers have worn into his ivory planar compass. I must admit, I have begun to question the wisdom of this journey, not only for the obvious danger such an expedition holds, or even because we seek audience with the ancient Obyrith Pale Night, though surely that alone is reason enough. No, my doubt is fed by what I can no longer see. I do not recognize the warmth and wisdom of a man who has been my teacher and mentor these past 5 years. Master Aethon has become consumed by texts that even the avowed keep under lock and key. I have found him, eyes bloodshot, hunched over a fragmented copy of the Black Scrolls of Om. He was in the midst of reading the texts of Black Cult founder Tulkut Nor Om, reciting his words as though they were prayer. And all this writhes below you and around you, and your horror makes you part of it. Your flesh corrupted, your soul rent, and your desires bathed in evil and black blood. No, demon spawn, you are not forgotten. The terror of existence beyond death is yours. Now writhe and rise forth. When he noticed my presence, his eyes rose to meet my own, but I do not think he actually saw me. He saw only the abyssal void that the Black Reader Om dies screaming about. When I first arrived as a novice researcher, Archmagister Aethon was renowned for his knowledge, acumen, and methodical documentation of planar phenomena. He taught me to observe with precision, to theorize with rigor, and most critically, to question with humility. We are but moths circling the flames of cosmic truth, he would often say. We must temper our ambition for knowledge with caution and patience. Draw too close, and we may singe our wings. Yet now he speaks of nothing but her shroud, what lies beneath the veil, what secrets does she hold. He has dismissed all the conventional tenets of academic scholarship. Recently, when questioned about the merits of our expedition, Aethon lectured, "Pale Night's veil conceals the ultimate truth of demonkind, the Obyrith's true origin, their purpose, their meaning, and no man has confirmed such knowledge and return to record it. We will be the first. I have tried to remind him of the legends that share the fate of those who have glimpsed beneath her veil, the stories of reality itself rejecting such visions, such knowledge, how the mind fragments, unable to accommodate what it perceives. He dismisses these as apocryphal tales of the ignorant, carelessly written by those with a lack of understanding or even empathy. I will remain by his side out of loyalty, out of love for a man who has been like a father to me. I owe him my life, but I write this entry because I am afraid of what is to come. Lucan closed his journal and secured it with a thin cord of braided rope. Outside his window, the eternal dim torchlight of the Sword Coast Fortress Archive cast long shadows across the courtyard as he reflected upon all that had transpired in the last year. Former colleagues of academia now avoid their quarters. They cross to the other side of paths when they see Master Aethon approaching. Ulront, the former keeper of tomes and leader of the Avowed, a secluded group tasked with protection of the library, had tolerated Aethon's increasingly erratic and esoteric methods, all in the name of knowledge acquisition. However, that changed when Janussi took over as the authority at Candlekeep. A devotee of Tanar'ri, he had little patience for Aethon's behavior and soon labeled his rituals as bordering on the heretical. He was commanded to cease such practices, but he ignored each repeated order. It has only been 7 months since he was stripped of his titles and his status revoked. Janussi had only stopped short of exiling Aethon due to loyalists that remained on the Council of the Avowed, a small gesture for the lifelong contributions of a man who has called Candlekeep home for nearly 5 decades. "Apprentice!" His voice came from the doorway of our study, carrying a tone of anticipation. "The time draws near." Master Aethon stood silhouetted against the hallway light. Once broad-shouldered and commanding, he had grown gaunt these last few seasons. His robes, once immaculate blue wool embroidered with silver constellations of the arcane, now hung loosely from his frame, stained and tattered with reagents and spotted with candle wax in a myriad of colors. His beard, formerly a point of vanity with its careful and immaculate grooming, had become a tangled gray mass of neglect. Only his eyes remained unchanged, distant but still sharp, still intelligent, and now burning with purpose. "The preparations are complete," he said, moving to his work table. He lifted a heavy rod of dull black iron, split at the end like a serpent's tongue. It seemed to absorb the candlelight rather than reflect it. "Do you know why the Abyss is the graveyard of the ambitious, Lucan?" he asked, running a scarred thumb along the mundane metal. I shook my head no. "Because gravity there works on the soul, not just the body, and it is infinitely easier to fall in than to climb out." He held the instrument up to the light, inspecting it for flaws as he continued to explain. "The novice or foolish abyssal traveler might simply cast a plane shift spell bought from a local wizard shop," Aethon smirked. "Oh, they may well find their arrival, but simply arriving is not the problem, my boy. Precision is. Without a specific key, you are leaping off a cliff into the darkness of an infinite unknown. You might land upon the iron decks of a ship of chaos, only to find your indentured servitude to the Doomguard of Sigil. Or you might wash upon the banks of the river Styx, your mind wiped clean by its unholy and amnesiac waters." He struck the fork against the heavy oaken table. It made only a faint audible sound, but the vibration pressed against my eardrums and rattled my teeth. "To survive," my master continued, "we must bypass the surface layers entirely. We must thread the abyssal needle." He wrapped the fork in a cloth and handed it to me along with an arcane scroll and a stern warning. "Each layer of the abyss sings a different, discordant song, my boy. This fork has been tempered to the exact metaphysical resonance of our destination, and it took more years than I care to count to acquire, isolate, and decipher the frequency of Androlynne. Guard it with your life, apprentice. Without it, we have no path home. This is our return ticket." He turned back to the window, looking out at the safety of the Candlekeep courtyard one last time. "Pack only what you can carry, Lucan. We leave at midnight." The descent was not a fall, but a fading, almost spiritual in nature, at least to a novice plains traveler such as myself. There was no plunge into fire and brimstone, as so many moralists in temples across the Forgotten Realms would have the peasantry believe. The Abyssal Realm received us as a mother receives an unwanted child, with resigned acceptance and a subtle, cruel indifference. Still, there are no words in Common, Elvish, or even the Abyssal tongues that can adequately describe what planar scholars and cartographers have conveniently cataloged as the 471st layer of the Abyss, a designation of the material plane one can only assume is either ignored or ridiculed by its inhabitants. The layer is called Androlynne, but it is not a location or a place in the same way that Waterdeep or Baldur's Gate is a place. But it is a sight to behold without equal. A surreal, almost storybook realm of beautiful lies stretching across the horizon like a landscape painted by a madman and wholly out of place in the abyss. Its rolling hills and tall grasslands, washed in the pastel hues of lavender and pale pink, would easily confuse the uninitiated into thinking they had arrived into the Feywild. But while abyssal corruption has been subdued here, hints of its horror are still visible. The most obvious of which is a sky of serene blues and enormous white puffy clouds intersecting with the abyssal rot to become a vast, swirling nebula that I can only describe as creamy milk being stirred into the crimson blood of the innocent. Closer examination only continues to reveal such dread deceits. The blades of grass swaying to the unseen wind were not vegetation, but fine, translucent cilia that twitched toward the living warmth of our boots. And the trees, their bark weeping a resin that smelled of decay, only mostly masked by the scent of aromatic flowers. We first arrived in a small, dreamlike town Master Aethon called Melantenburg. He explained to me that for planar travelers arriving in Androlynne, Melantenburg served as the best and perhaps only safe haven and entry point. The surreal village functions as the staging area for the celestial forces of good from Arborea, who have waged war here against the tide of chaos since before recorded time. We soon made our way out of Melantenburg and toward Palenight's seat of power on Androlynne, easily located atop a dark peak called Mother's Mountain. We had only barely started our expedition when a haunting wind began to carry the soft sounds of childlike weeping. "The laments," Aethon whispered, his face mixing both wonder and sadness. "The Eladrin children, just as the text described." I knew the stories from our study, how Pale Night had betrayed a pact made with a consort of Queen Morwell of the Court of Stars named Ascodel, trapping thousands of young Eladrin children on this layer, imprisoned and unaging to this day. I made a divine sign with my hand, a habit from childhood that Aethon would have once gently corrected as superstition unbecoming a scholar. Now he seemed to not notice. We traversed the plain as the protection spells we prepared just for this journey hummed around us, creating a barrier that helped obscure our presence from most, but not all, of the layers occupying Tanar'ri. While the rest of Androlynne had been transformed into the surreal and pastel, the towering peak that was our destination, located north of a ghostly lake called Lake Lambrador, stubbornly retained the layer's original atmosphere, a colorless gloom as though it were ripped straight out of the Shadowfell. Perhaps we walked for hours, days, or just moments. It's really hard to gauge. Time means very little in the Abyss and fluctuates wildly as the Abyss wishes, the landscape repeating itself without quite repeating, like the same melody of a song, only played in a new key. The trees were always just ahead, the flowers always just behind, the horizon always precisely where it had been, neither approaching nor retreating. These were just a few of the many characteristics that lead many to believe the Abyss is aware, sentient, alive, and always the sense of being watched. Not by eyes, nothing as mundane as that, but by an attention vast and patient. "I think she knows we're here," I said to Master Aethon. "She has always known we were coming," he replied. "She knew before we were born, before our parents were born, before the first human drew breath." That is what it means to be an Obyrith, young Lucan. They do not exist in time as we do. They exist around it, the way a river exists around the fish that swim within it. Then she knows how this ends. Yes. And she is allowing it? Yes. Something about that response, his careless acceptance of such an invitation, hit me like a splash of Stygian waters, suddenly turning my blood to ice. I had been anxious, even scared of this journey, but I had always trusted my master's intuition and guidance. Trust that was now fraying before my eyes, turning my fear into dread realization. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to scream it, to shake him, to make him understand that a being who would permit her own unveiling must have reasons, and those reasons could not be a grace upon the mortal world. But my master had already moved forward in full stride. Before long, the winds changed, now carrying the familiar sense of a war that has no beginning and no end. We crested a low rise, the cilia-like grass swaying in waves of soft violet, and then saw them. In the distance, a phalanx of Eladrin, celestial fey knights from Arborea, their armor gleaming silver. They were holding fast against a demonic tide of creatures with too many limbs or too few, but ample claws and teeth. Pale knight's brood, no doubt. However, the expected sounds of war, the clang of steel and iron, followed by blood-curdling screams, were dulled, muted, and mostly replaced with the soft, sorrowful thud of bodies falling onto this fairy tale-like landscape. Memory will never be able to purge my witness of a celestial holophant of golden light, its divine form broken, cruelly impaled upon a spire of crystalline bone. Its blood ran silver, pooling in the surreal lavender grassland, its life essence now feeding the psyllium and the lair's hungry roots beneath. They fight to save what is already lost, Aethon noted, his voice aching. The Celestials believe they are sieging a prison. They do not understand they are only walking into her nursery. The silence here, it is not peace. It is the held breath of a predator watching his prey grow tired. Ignore them, Aethon cautioned, though his own eyes darted nervously to the sky. He gestured to the north where the pastel horizon gave way to the deep, silent gloom of gray skies. And there, my young apprentice, that is where the fighting stops and the real fear begins. Even war dare not tread on the hem of her gown. As we walked, Aethon muttered continuously, switching between languages almost incoherently. Abyssal, infernal, celestial, tongues that predated divine script. I only caught fragments, calculations, invocations, and increasingly what sounded like divine prayers and pleas. At the foothills of Mother's Mountain, we came upon dozens of those trapped Eladrin children. They wandered among the surreal hills, their laments broken by occasional laughter, bright but fleeting and brittle as glass. They did not age, they did not die. They were imprisoned and preserved here like flies in amber. One of them, a girl with hair like dawn over the sea of fallen stars, tugged at my sleeve. "Shh, you're too loud," she hissed, pressing a finger to her lips. "Your heart, your blood, your breath, it's all noise to Mother. If you go up there, she'll make you quiet. She'll make you quiet forever." I wanted to take her hand. I wanted to comfort her. I wanted to weep. "Don't speak to them," Aethon warned, "and don't look too long. They are hers now." Soon, as if time had any meaning, we crested a ridge that revealed a high mountain valley. It was a landscape unlike any seen in the material world. A clearing split open to reveal what might have been mineral veins or living roots that pulsed with their luminescence. "There," he whispered. "Oh, my dear boy, there." Just beyond sat a long path winding down to a large clearing resting in the valley below. We had found our destination, not because of any planar knowledge or charted map. We found it because palenight wished us to find it. "Master, we can still turn back. We could be in Sigil by supper." Aethon paused. He first looked at the valley clearing. We were only a few hundred feet from the garden, from her garden. He then turned back to me. His blue eyes were steel gray, like the sea after a storm. He smiled his reassuring smile as he responded. "Turn back? My son, how can I turn back from answers I have spent a lifetime to acquire?" "But they say she is certain madness, even death, to look upon," I pleaded. "They say even reality rejects her presence, that she is not meant for mortal eyes or minds." "They say," Aethon mocked gently, Uninformed scholars say, the Tanar'ri say, the gods say, but what does the silence say? My child, everyone studies the Tanar'ri. We have volumes on each of the demon lords. They are all children, Lucan. Powerful children, but children nonetheless. But the Obyriths, they remember the abyss before it was. They hold the knowledge of what came before even the gods. And among them, she is the oldest. She is their mother. The mother of demons, I acknowledged as my head lowered. He smiled, and something in that smile should have made me turn back, to flee. I had the attunement key, I had the plane shift scroll, but I could never abandon my master. I was resigned to our fate, whatever that fate was. Yes, young Lucan, she is the progenitor and the key. Even demon lords respect her most, fear her. She is the genesis, and she is older than our universe. What does that even mean? I asked. How can anything be older than the universe? Aethon's smile widened as if he anticipated the question. That, dear boy, is what we are here to find out. He nodded reassuringly as he began to walk down that path, and because I loved him as a son loves a father who taught him to read the stars, I followed. I followed, and we descended into the mother's cradle, the garden of the White Lady and Queen of Night. The garden stretched open before us, countless acres dotted with massive alien statues of almost pure white abstract design, each twisted and elongated into a unique, one-of-a-kind form. From the pallid soil, flowers blossomed, if flowers they could be called. They were pale, fleshy blossoms, white and translucent, their petals thin as membrane. At the center of each bloom was a small, hard seed of pure white that gleamed like enamel. However, as we drew closer, I saw the flora for what they were. They were not made of plant matter. They were teeth. Thousands of tiny milk-white teeth arranged in rosettes. This garden was in reality an ossuary. Great calcified ribs curved up from the earth to form archways. Femurs and tibias were arranged in intricate spiraling patterns that hurt the eyes to follow. Aethon knelt beside one cluster of flowers. This garden grows from children's teeth, but whose children? I wanted to answer, but my throat had closed around the words. I could see her now, in the heart of her garden, the mother of demons. I had thought myself prepared for the horrors to come. I studied the accounts of astral travelers, the broken ramblings of madmen, and descriptions in texts so ancient they were written on animal skin rather than vellum. I believed I knew what to expect, but I knew nothing. I was not prepared. Both my body and mind had frozen, my legs simply refusing to carry me a step further. "Master," I whispered, "please." He didn't hear me. Or perhaps he did, and it just no longer mattered. Aethon was undeterred, walking directly toward her. I watched him descend into that garden, watched the flowers turn toward him as he passed, watched his approach to an ancient evil at the garden's heart. How does one describe the indescribable? Poets try with metaphor, bards with story and song, scholars with measurement, and the insane? Perhaps truth, at least their truth. I have only my words, so please understand just how far short they will fall. She stood, no, that's wrong. The ancient Obyrith did not so much occupy space as become it, absorbing the light around her. I cannot describe with any precision the ancient Obyrith's form. Her presence seemed untethered, a distorted white silhouette, phasing, even tearing, as though she simultaneously existed across multiple dimensions, each trying desperately to anchor her to, or, in hindsight, perhaps exiling her from, their reality. The ethereal silk that wrapped her shimmered and pulsed, like the pause between heartbeats where death considers its claim on the soul, but then decides at the last second to wait. The ghostly shroud covered her completely, and where the diaphanous threads touched the earth, her grotesque milky flowers sprang forth instantly. She loomed impossibly tall, maybe 20 feet, maybe 100, my mind unable to decipher the vision my eyes captured. Perhaps the light of our reality bent around her or tried in vain to avoid her. indifferent to any need to understand, and thus making the question meaningless. She did not stand, she did not walk, she did not float or drift, she simply was. I do recall she paused the tending of her garden. There was no visible face, no eyes to gaze upon my master, all hidden behind her phantom shroud and a spectral funeral veil, translucent and rippling like the surface of water that conceals a deep unknown below. In the next moment, I felt the weight of divine attention settle upon me as the ancient evil was towering over Master Aethon. Though my eyes never trailed off her form, my mind recalls no movement. Perhaps she had always been there. Pale Night did not speak. She did not need to, but Master Aethon did. A single word. Mother. The word striking against the silence and a complete stillness that had seemed to settle across the entire plain. Pale Night, White Lady and Queen of Night, my master called out, his voice stronger than it had been in months. I am Aethon of Candlekeep, scholar of the plains. I have traveled across the multiverse, seeking your knowledge. The shroud rippled, a motion, perhaps, of curiosity. I have traced the lineage of the Tanar'ri back to the flesh forges and your arrival to our world. I have read the black scrolls of Tulkat Noram, its words burned into my dreams. I have given everything to seek your audience, my family, my reputation, and as many believe, I have performed rituals that forever stain my soul. I have sacrificed, his voice broke. I have sacrificed children, metaphorical perhaps, but children nonetheless. Apprentices who trusted me, who followed me too far to find your truth. I know what you are. You are the mother of demons. You know the answer I seek. What truth lies beyond your veil? What secret do you keep from all creation? What passed between them next I cannot say, for it occurred in unbroken silence. She did not speak, at least not in words, but her presence seemed to offer answer enough to questions my master had yet to ask. Then Pale Night leaned forward, like that of a mother bending to hear a child's whisper, and then nodded, once, slowly, softly. Master Aethon then reached for the veil. No, Master, please. I was weeping now, though I did not remember beginning. He turned to look at me and smiled, and for that brief moment, he was the man I remembered. Look away, Lucan, he said gently. Look away and remember me as I was. I am ashamed to admit that I did exactly as my master instructed. I looked away. I am not brave, I am not noble. I looked away because I wanted to live, and because some part of me understood in that very moment that my master had always known this to be a one-way journey. But though I saw nothing, I felt it, the break. Reality is a fabric. We walk upon it, breathe through it, take it for granted. In Androlynne, that fabric is thin, already frayed by sorrows created from the ancient animus of distant worlds and dimensions. I opened my eyes just as the White Lady gracefully replaced her veil with a gesture that seemed modest, almost demure. Aethon stood motionless, his perfectly still hands raised to the shroud he had lifted. The alien queen stood before him, towering, examining his form. For one fleeting moment I thought perhaps the legends were wrong, that he had survived his glimpse beyond the veil. That is, until he began to change. It started with his fingers, the joints stretching and bending in directions no human hand moves. His skin rippled like the disturbed surface of a once still pond. His body began to contort, expanding in some places, contracting in others, fractures appearing along the body seams of organic limbs, tearing to leak an otherworldly glow, as if reality had suddenly become unsure, confused, not able to agree on what or where he should be. My master made no sound, no cry. His face did not betray the agony of the horror I was about to witness. Not when his rib cage split open like the petals of a flower. Not when his spine curved backward until the vertebrae punctured forward through his robes. And not when his skull began to reshape itself in rhythmic crimson pulses of cosmic horror. Through it all, Pale Night observed in calm silence, her head even tilting ever so slightly in what I believe was a morbid curiosity, delight, or perhaps both. Aethon's twisted, elongated form then began to lose all color, slowly calcifying into pale white. The horror of it all only registered as Aethon's broken silhouette found its resting place in the gardens of the pallid soil. He had become another of the countless pale white monuments to abyssal evil. The White Lady's shroud shifted, and with it the gaze of the garden, of her mountain, of the lair itself, transferred from the settled garden statue of my master to me. Every instinct screamed to pull the planeshift scroll from my pack, to flee the abyss and never return, but my limbs were heavy as though filled with lead and cold water. I was pinned by a gravity that had nothing to do with the mass of this realm or the physics of the abyss. This idea of escape had barely shaped into coherent thought when the Obyrith Lord, moving without moving, towered above me. I was now her focus. My body trembled, and I averted my eyes. I dared not look upon her. Yet the immense weight of her presence had invaded both my mind and soul. Then pale night, perhaps the most ancient of all evils, herself an echo of a dead universe, spoke directly to me. It started as a quiver, an itch crawling behind my eyes. Her voice slithered into my mind, not as sound, but through the embodiment of emotion and pain. Every concept was a blade dragged across the inside of my skull. It was a form of telepathy, to be sure, but it was also much more. Despite my fear that her thoughts were incompatible with my mind, the depth and lucidity of her meaning was as clear to me as any spoken word. Without a sound, the mother of demons said all she needed to say. Thoughts I will never forget and emotions I can never shake. Yet words are not adequate to convey her message, but they will have to do.
You stare, how your kind loves to stare, at flowers, sunsets, children, my veil. Your master asks why I wear the veil and what lies beyond. You think I wear this veil because my presence stains the air? You, who are built from specks of borrowed starlight, think you see my true form and recoil from some unspeakable horror. How arrogant to think I would protect you, your gods, or this universe from anything. No, I wear this veil not because I am hideous. I wear a veil because it is you who are hideous. All of you, every repugnant soul in this pathetic universe. This silken shroud is a filter, a mercy for me. Before the stars ignited, before your gods even dreamed, I was perfection. My form a beauty of birth, consumption, and rebirth, so flawless your reality cannot comprehend. I am the first dream of oblivion. I am the ancient mother, and you are my repulsive afterbirth. Nothing more than a trail of waste left behind when my true child was born, and I cannot bear to look upon you. Your master sought to glimpse my divinity, to look beyond my veil. He found exactly what he sought. Truth, that I am the perfection, and you are the rot. I am the face of the universe that was, and the face of the silence that will be. My child is the seed of consumption and renewal, the beautiful, logical end of all things. We have done this before, countless times. We arrive, we seed, we consume, and we continue. We are not the invaders, we are the conclusion. Your master understood this in his last moments, and now rests in my garden, assembled to insignificance, confronting grand magnificence. Soon this reality will join all others we've perfected through annihilation. It's simply what we are.
Then, just as suddenly as it began, it ceased. My eyes next registered the White Lady again tending her garden. With her attention withdrawn, so too did the protection of her presence evaporate. The surreal stillness of the garden shattered violently. The wind howled, carrying the weeping of the Eladrin children once again, louder now, a lament of their misery. The ground beneath me softened, turning spongy and warm, organic. Her garden had awakened. As I attempted to gather my senses, a sound started at the edge of hearing. A dry, rhythmic clicking. I looked down. The flowers, rosettes of milk-white teeth, began chattering, thousands of them gnashing in anticipation, vibrating in the soil. The roots of the bone archways groaned, shifting to block the path out. The surreal beauty of Androlynne was peeling away, revealing its chaotic, hungry truth beneath. I was no longer a guest here. I was a foreign object, an invader in a living realm that wanted me purged. Terror and realization finally jolted my system awake, overriding the paralysis of my broken mind. In the spasm of instinct or madness, which I still cannot explain, Aethon's final lesson echoed in my panic. Observe, record, retrieve. As I scrambled backward over the chattering teeth, my hand shot out, seizing one of the gnashing white blossoms by its pulsating stem. It clamped down on my leather glove, vibrating with a ravenous, clicking fury, but I refused to let go. I wanted proof that this horror was not delusion or insanity. I needed a physical weight to anchor the truth my master had died for. I shoved the gnashing flower deep into my pack, a living, biting memory of where he fell. As I frantically retraced the path away from her garden, my fingers fumbled blindly to find the only hope of my survival, the folded cloth that contained the scroll of planeshift and the tuning fork Aethon had given me. It was my only salvation, the key that would ensure my soul would not forever haunt her garden. I recall only fragments of the journey back to the material plane. What I remember most vividly is the relief that washed over me as I pulled the cold metal of the tuning fork from my pack, its vibrating hum reassuring me that the scroll of planeshift Master Aethon had given would free me of that place. I remember stumbling away from the bone garden, surprised and selfishly thankful that I did not meet the same fate as that of my master. I am ashamed to admit now that I did not even look back. To do so was to join him. I struck the fork against a stone outcropping. The metal sang a discordant, shrieking note as I began the planeshift incantation. The magic tore at my soul, confirmation that leaving the abyss is always harder than its entering, that these depths of chaos seek to keep what they capture. The air around me twisted as the pastel nightmare of Androlynne folded in on itself, replaced by the dizzying gray vertigo of the astral, and then, with a lurch that emptied my stomach, the hard cobblestones of Sigil. I next found myself collapsed in the lower ward, retching, the smoke and smog of the city of doors tasting like the sweetest nectar compared to the perfumed rot of the pale night's realm. I had made it to the Outlands. I was safe, but I was not whole. Over the next 3 days, I made my way to the Sword Coast and then the familiar gates of Candlekeep. I hesitated as the walls rose from the salty mist of the trackless sea to judge me, weary from a pack that held the weight of Master Aethon's research and his memory. 9 full journals and 24 scrolls, his life's work on palenight and the Obyrith lords. I barely had a moment to wash the abyssal stench from my body before the Keeper of Tomes and many of the Avowed descended upon me, asking what had happened. "He's gone," I told them, my voice hollow. "He found what he was looking for." They asked me to present his findings, to honor his legacy, to share what he had learned. I smiled and nodded and promised I would. That night, I retreated to my quarters. I lit the hearth fire, feeding it dry wood until it roared. With trembling hands, I tore a page from my master's journal, a notated map of Androlynne, and cast it into the flames. But it did not burn. The parchment sat atop the coals untouched, the ink glistening in the heat. A soft blue rune flared on the ceiling of my chamber. The wards of preservation. In my desperation and delirium, I had forgotten the first rule of the great library. Nothing written within these walls is permitted to perish. However, I knew if I surrendered these books to the archives, they would be preserved for eternity. I packed my bags again. I did not wait for dawn. I slipped out of my quarters and made for the great gates. The gate warden watched me pass, confused by my haste, but he did not stop me. One is always free to leave Candlekeep, even if re-entry is a privilege rarely granted twice. I walked until the silhouette of the fortress was just a jagged line against the stars, standing on the cliffs overlooking the Sea of Swords. There, beyond the reach of the ancient wards and eyes of sages, I built a pyre of driftwood. I fed Master Aethon's journals to the flames. I burned every scroll, every sketch, every note, every conjecture, every prayer. I watched the smoke drift out over the sea, carrying the horrible secrets of the Obyriths away on the wind. However, I was careless, so it was no surprise that the avowed sages and scholars found the scorch marks the next morning. They knew what I had done, and they were not at all pleased. Destruction of knowledge is perhaps the most unforgivable of sins in the eyes of the great fortress library, even outside its walls. I, too, was cast from the walls of Candlekeep, my name struck from the rolls, forever barred from the gates of the great fortress archive. I accepted my exile without protest and would head east. After all, how could I tell them the truth? How could I explain that some questions are better left unasked? Featherdale is a place of small, manageable silences, and I have learned the habit of ordinary days. My arrival in this valley of the Dalelands only a few years ago has shown my mind and soul a kindness. I do not practice magic. I do not study the plains. Ironically, I tend a garden, a normal garden where flowers grow from seeds, not teeth, and the crop does not bite back. I chuckle now at the thought of that toothy flower, long discarded. Without the soured soil of Palenight's garden, the souvenir of my visit had withered within months of my return from Androlynne, its clicking stilled. My days are filled with the mundane tasks of growing potatoes and turnips, trimming flowers, and listening to the talk of neighbors who believe the world ends at the edge of this valley, oblivious to the unseen horrors of the lower plains. I allow them this blissful ignorance, and permit myself at times the illusion that I have become one of them. And for a time, this succeeded. Each day, the trauma of the abyss recedes a little further in the abstract. Like a tale told in the third person, Aethon and I nothing more than characters from a book once read. But at night, most nights, I'm reminded once again. The dream comes, but it's routine now. 100 dreams and it always ends the same. Pale night towers before me in her garden, the veiled, cruel mother. I have the same question. I receive the same mocking laughter without answer. Her silence has become as familiar a fixture as my desk and chair, furniture of the mind. However, all that changed last night. It began as it always did, in the Queen of Night's garden ossuary, my soul filled with a fear that has become dulled by repetition, more a discomfort than any existential horror. This time, though, there was no laugh. The scene shifted abruptly, violently. The White Lady disappears, replaced with the calcified figure that was once Aethon. The wind begins to carry the laments of the Eladrin children, as the twisted monument of my former master begins to crack and fracture. Suddenly, the statue of bone collapses. I drop to my knees to pick up the pieces, but they have been transformed into the charred remnants of Aethon's journals I once burned. I begin to sift through the smoldering ash as the rhythmic thumping of a heartbeat fills the air, growing louder to an almost deafening volume. I begin to scream when the familiar voice of Aethon fills my mind. It is time to dig in the soil of chaos, young Lucan. I wake with a gasp, sitting upright in the dark. The silence of the cottage is absolute, save for the persistent pulse of a heartbeat, softly, faintly. My first instinct is that this is my own heart racing, but soon realize the drone I hear does not match my own quickened pulse. The sound is coming from below, beneath my floorboards, rhythmic, insistent. I light a lantern, my hands trembling so violently the flame creates frantic shadows against the walls. I push a heavy oaken writing table aside and pry the floorboards with a rusty crowbar, the wood shrieking as nails give way to my frantic, adrenaline-fueled demolition. It is the smell that hits me first, that familiar scent of perfume masked rot from Androlynne. Then, a chattering as my blood runs cold. I gather my courage and lower the lantern into the crawlspace. The withered husk of that terrible, pale flower is now gone. It has bloomed, blossoming to the size of a child's head, its petals of milk-white enamel glistening in the light like a hypnotic clicking mandala. The abyssal flower's roots thread down deep through soil, clay, and stone. The petals seem to be aware of my presence, opening fully, chittering and rustling as though they were speaking in some foreign tongue. To be honest, my first instinct was to run, to burn the cottage to the ground and flee. Perhaps it was the obsessive curiosity fated to Aethon, passed from master to apprentice, or maybe it was simply the resignation that my fate, whatever it may be, was set and unavoidable. Regardless, as I reached for the pale flower, I was reminded of the scholar's discipline Aethon had instilled in me: to observe, to record, to retrieve. My fingertips grazed the petals. The surface is softer than it looks, like the inside of a cheek, and faintly warm. The flower jerked, snapping shut in reflex. And then my reality dropped away. My mind had left Featherdale. I was following the familiar fate of planar travel across a dozen horizons at once. Pazunia opened beneath me, a plain of red dust, rusted iron fortress towers, and countless portals, each glowing with its own malignant hue. I know the name without the need to remember, Aethon's studies serving me well. The plane of infinite portals, infamous entry point to the abyss. I blink and the scene shifts. Layer 66, the dark webs of the demon web pits, the screaming jungles of the gaping maw in Layer 88, and the blood-smeared walls of the never-ending labyrinth that is the endless maze of Layer 600, just to name a few. Visions of the Eladrin children of Androlynne drift past me, their eyes carrying the sorrow of many lifetimes. I see the girl with hair like dawn over the sea of fallen stars. She lifts a pale flower. It chatters in her tiny hand. "You dropped something," she says. Layer after layer slams through me, some named, some beyond any known chart, but each unmistakable in their abyssal origins. I realize this was Aethon's legacy. My master walked the edges of madness, charting the depths of its chaos, perhaps tracking the course of the seed of evil, her child. The visions then fade, the flower shivering in my hand. My left forearm burns. With a fumbling hand, I roll up my sleeve. The mark is fresh, yet already healed, as if it had always been there and I am now just seeing it for the first time. Dark ink winds along my skin, forming characters I recognize as abyssal script. I silently thank Aethon for the many hundreds of pages I was forced to transcribe until my wrist cramped. The word is simple, yet ominous. Pazunia, the first layer, the beginning of any descent. I look from my new tattoo to the flower and back again. The realization comes with a hollow, sinking certainty. In burning Aethon's work, I had foolishly tried to ignore the flow of corruption. Instead, I destroyed perhaps the best mortal knowledge concerning the unavoidable tide of chaos to come. Now, perhaps Aethon's knowledge has found another medium, or so I desperately hope. "Is that you, Master?" I ask, my hand hovering over the pale flower. "Give me a sign. Is this lesson or lure?" The petals tremble, the teeth click softly. It could be affirmation, it could be hunger, or it could be deceit. The abyss is a realm where endings are seldom singular. Aethon's calcified form may occupy her garden, but his journeys, his observations, his obsessions, perhaps they have bled into other things, into this flower, into me. Or perhaps it is nothing of Aethon at all. Perhaps the abyss has simply found a new way to bait its hook. In the days that follow, I quietly prepared. I make no announcement, I tell no one. I had thought of writing several letters, but left them in a neat stack on my table, each one drafted and then abandoned. I mean, what would I even say? That the quiet man of the valley, best known for his garden of turnips, means to walk into a plain of demons, a blossom of teeth as his compass. So it is these writings and this journal that must suffice to serve as my chronicle of record. I hastily drafted a rough chart of the abyss. It is a crude map organized in ways that only make sense to mortals, an illusion of structure that is completely anathema to the chaotic nature of its pelagic depths. Nonetheless, I write Pazunia beside the first circle and beneath it various notes detailing its biome, landscape, portals, and known dangers of lords and petty tyrants. Some of this knowledge is dredged from my memory, but most was born from my newfound inked body art. In the days since the flower's renewal, I've learned how to control its gift, or curse, of abyssal sight. My mind now able to operate as a dam, allowing or restricting the flow of its visions into my thoughts. Each time I permit its surreal knowledge to bleed into my psyche, a new layer opens up to me, and when I return from each mental journey, a new mark appears on my skin. Some I recognize, most I do not. Fiendish runes without names, demonic sigils designating layers never written into any known mortal archive. By the eve of my departure, the majority of my body, my skin now transformed into a living parchment, would resemble an academic cheat sheet for the realm's most advanced abyssal final. A small mercy, each fragment of Tanar'ri script and symbol had only been tattooed upon sections of skin still visible to my own eyes, thus removing my need to pack a mirror for any creative planar transcriptions that I might need during my explorations. I provision my pack for the long journey ahead: rations, chalk, spare ink, the few spells and minor wards I still remember how to cast, and a dagger that is far more a symbolic comfort than any actual protection. I also find the old tuning fork that once hummed with Androlynne's resonance. It now only serves as a reminder and warning that this time there is no carefully crafted key of safe passage. My odyssey must begin the old-fashioned way, in Sigil, the city of doors, where my life savings in coin and a few gems will hopefully charter my descent. Aethon once told me that scholars like us were drawn to knowledge like moths circling a flame. Until recently, I really thought I had flown away, finding my escape to rest upon a quiet leaf in this Daleland's valley. But the candle of discovery does not let go so easily. So I leave this journal here, to rest upon a table where I once pretended to be a simple man. But the fires of knowledge unknown have flickered once again, and the moth must return to the flame. May the divine wisdom of Ogma's grace protect me, and may the binder of what is known grant me the courage to find the truths I seek. Signed, Lucan Thalaveros, apprentice to Master Aethon Oresian. 9 Alturiac, 1494 Dale Reckoning, year of 12 warnings. Lucan closed his journal, securing it with a braided cord. He placed it neatly on the table next to his quill, an historical accounting left to a future he anticipated would not include him. He closed the cottage door behind him, pausing to take a long last look at the pre-dawn valley he called home. The air was crisp, the insects hummed, and his garden had flourished. It was a quiet, peaceful beauty. Even the stars, with their indifferent sparkle, were more vibrant this early morning. Nothing looked out of place. Nothing ever does in the beginning. Lucan smiled as he playfully cursed his own insanity for leaving such serenity. In his pack, journal pages fluttered, blank and waiting, the pale enamel flower chattering just faintly. Lucan slung it over his shoulder and tightened the straps. "For the record," he murmured, "I go of my own will." The flower clicked, almost mockingly, a sound not unlike a lock tumbling open. "Okay then, show me," Lucan commanded as he stepped into the dark dawn, the first steps of the long journey ahead. The flower's soft chattering soon synchronized with Lucan's own footsteps, his only companion, his only conversation. As the silhouette of the Dalelands faded into the horizon, the questions lingered in the mist behind him. Was he explorer or prey, guide or lure? Lucan shrugged. In truth, the distinction no longer really mattered. All that remained was the path forward, the pull of the unknown, and his certainty that some truths can only be learned through descent. While the prologue tale you just heard contains some created elements to create a cohesive story, I would like to make it clear that all the provided lore is canonical to at least one edition of the published text. The history and lore of the Abyss, and specifically the majority of its countless layers, are both fascinating and yet at the same time most challenging in their obscurity. I have ignored coverage of this chaotic plane for far too long, and currently have a series of lengthy videos in progress totaling over a dozen hours, each dedicated to a facet of abyssal lore, including but not limited to the myriad of Obyrith and demon lords, as well as the single largest lore deep dive I have ever done on this channel, a treatise many hours long documenting each and every known layer ever published across any edition of the lore. I can confidently say that there is nothing on the platform that will reach this deep into the infinite layers of the abyss. So keep an eye on the channel. I hope you will join me on what I promise to be the most eye-opening series of lore expeditions into the sea of chaos and anarchy ever put to video. Thank you for watching and embracing my work. If you want to help a small creator like myself in what is becoming an increasingly difficult environment to thrive in and keep this channel viable, all of my support links are below. Until next time, take care, my friends.